It's the Ed Bernstein Show, Home Edition. Now, here's your host, Ed Bernstein.
Hey, welcome to our show. Once again, the election is coming up, and you know how important I think these judicial races are. And with me is candidate Phil Aurbach, who I've known for a long, long time. And a little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about question one. You know, there's questions on the ballot this year. I know we're all talking about the presidential race and all these judicial races, but there's also some questions that you're going to have to make decisions on. So we're going to talk about with Elliott Anderson on question one. So Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Ed.
I know you've been a very prominent attorney for a long time. I've known you since probably, the 70s. Why run for judge?
I have had so much experience in court. You know, when I started, there were 6 judges, and now there's almost 60. And so some were good and some were bad. And usually the bad ones were the ones that didn't have a lot of trial experience. So I was in front of a couple of judges in the last 5 years, and my clients had to pay a lot more money. These judges made bad decisions. I had to appeal their decisions and have them reversed. And so because of the quality of some of the judges, I decided I would throw my hat in because I'm working part-time, and I decided I wanted to full-time give back to the community.
When you first started practicing, you mentioned there was 6 and maybe there were 7 courtrooms. So now that I'm thinking back in those days, and we all knew the judges very well. And as you're saying, today we have like 50 some different judges in district court. So when you think back about some of those judges that you practiced in front of in the old days, who would you try to emulate?
I really liked J. Charles Thompson. He was Department 1. His courtroom demeanor, as well as Howard Babcock, which was courtroom 6, Department 6. They both had a courtroom demeanor that was judicial. It wasn't like a joke. There were some judges that were more like having fun. Do you remember Judge Legates had a gong, and he would gong if you talked too much. And then you'd have to sit down. And so, you know, some of that was good, some of it's bad. Some judges I don't want to emulate. You know, some were really mean. So a new attorney that comes in front of a mean judge would, they'd be shaking so much they could hardly get words out. And so, you know, there's a whole gamut of judges. And I think, you know, currently there's some really qualified judges in business court, and then there's, they run the gamut from there. So I really would like to have the demeanor, the respect for people that Judge Babcock and Judge Thompson did, and have the respect of the people, of the attorneys and the litigants that many of the other judges that I've practiced in front of.
And you grew up in Las Vegas, and let's talk about some of the differences, between, firstly, growing up here, how different. I remember in the 70s when I came here, we had no speed limit on Boulder Highway. But why don't you talk about growing up in Las Vegas in those days and compare it to, where we are today?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because when I came here when I was 2, the Desert Inn was just opening up. My dad was a casino dealer in Pit Boss, and Sahara was called, I think, San Francisco Street, because the Sahara Hotel wasn't built yet, and they changed the name, which caused a whole bunch of people on the street to argue against it, but the county commission approved it. When I was in high school, I think there were 150,000 people maybe in Las Vegas. And I used to ride my motorcycle on Rainbow. It was a dirt power line road. And the little subdivision that we lived in was all cinder block. It's now Charleston near Hinson, near Valley View. And all of those houses, there was no flood control, Ed. So when we'd have a flash flood. You might as well grab a beer, open the back door, open the front door, because the water was coming through whether you liked it or not, you know. I had a paper route when I was younger, and I wanted to deliver more papers, so I increased the customer base, and my dad let me buy a motorcycle, and I was able to use that motorcycle to go to and from school, to and from my paper route. I went to Clark. I was the first 7th grade class at Gibson, and then the first 8th grade class at Garside, and then the first 9th grade class at Clark. I went out for the tennis team at Clark, and Coach Wilcox said, "Phil, we've got 13 on the squad. We're cutting it down to 12, and you're number 13." So ultimately, I made the tennis team, and I negotiated with a tennis pro in town to wash tennis courts and string tennis rackets in exchange for tennis lessons. And those tennis lessons and a lot of hard work made me, I was second in the state of Nevada my senior year, I was second in the state of Nevada in doubles. I got a tennis scholarship through college. I then just took student loans out through law school. And so, I've seen a whole lot of change, as you have, just being here in the 70s.
Yeah. Do you still play tennis?
Oh yeah, I play daily.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those great sports that you can continue to play as we get older. So that's a good thing, you know. There's been a lot of changes in our courts because of COVID-19. One of them is doing what we're doing right now. And do you think that some of these changes are going to be permanent with our judicial system? Do you see yourself, being a judge, having more, even without COVID-19, having more, virtual hearings and virtual motions just to save time?
I think they're really good on motions, not trials. But for example, as the attorneys have grown in number and spread out around the valley, the travel time to and from the courthouse with the traffic and the distance, and then you sit around in court and you wait, and then you travel back to your office, all of that is time that your client has to pay for, one way or the other. And so I would hope that the judges would agree that video hearings should continue. I have probably had 10 video hearings, and I really like them. It's a little nerve-wracking to make sure, like today, that I've got the right lighting, that my microphone works, that the background is correct, and all of that stuff. But I would hope that they would continue. I think the COVID has caused a huge problem with trials, though.
Yeah, because so much of a trial is the in-person, energy that you pick up, from witnesses and the body language, et cetera, that you miss out on Zoom.
Right. The facial expressions, the micro expressions of, whether somebody's just body language is really tough. I think masks are really difficult for people that are hearing impaired, but they're really good for people with braces. So, masks can work out sometimes and sometimes not.
When you think about how others would like to think of you as a sitting judge, what would be, some of those adjectives that they would use to describe your judicial demeanor?
I would hope that people would, one, think that I'm fair to both sides, two, that I listen to both sides and the arguments from both sides, and give them the value that the attorneys put into making these arguments. Attorneys put a lot of work into arguing their cases. Three, I hope that my appearance would give respect and compassion for the people that would appear in front of me. And I hope that, the legacy would be that people said that I was a fair judge.
So after you finished law school, you came back to Las Vegas, ended up obviously getting married, looking at the photograph behind you,
Right.
having
Right.
children. Yeah.
Right. I've got 2 children with my first wife. I have X1 and X2. My current wife, I've been married to 20 years. She has kids of her own. So we have, a mixed family. But I have 2 beautiful grandkids, 3 grandkids from my first wife. One is 19, her sophomore at UNLV, doing really well, getting good grades. The other one's 15, 16, and she goes to Faith Lutheran and is doing really well, is on the cheer squad. And then I have a 2-year-old that I'm the natural father of. And I've got, other kids that are my wife's kids.
Oh, I got kind of a Brady Bunch going here myself. But it keeps you young, Phil.
It does, especially the 2-year-old. Holy cow.
Maybe take the balance of our time and make the case of why somebody should vote for you.
I have the experience. I don't just dye my hair gray. I've been an attorney for a long time. I've had over 35 trials, 10 appeals. I've given back to the lawyers in this community by giving lectures on contracts, real estate, partnership disputes, business law, mechanics liens, employment law. And I would hope that I would like to have this job to do 2 things. One is to be a good judge, but also to help cases move along faster. I've got mediation and arbitration experience that would allow me to be a good settlement judge. If you had a case in front of another judge, they referred, many of the judges refer to settlement judges to help settle cases along, and I've got a lot of experience in that. My opponent doesn't have that experience, even though she's practiced for 20 years. My experience is far and above what most judges have on the bench currently. So I would hope that the voters of Clark County would recognize that, and that I'm excited to be the next district court judge in Department 4.
And Department 4 is an open department. Who's your predecessor there?
Carrie Early was the judge that decided not to run in this election. So she was the judge prior, and so it's open and it's a civil department, meaning that there's no criminal cases in it.
Right, and all your experiences basically is in that, although you were in the district attorney's office for a short period of time.
I was in the DA's office for a short period of time, and I had a criminal case. My client, unfortunately, is still in prison as a result of it, but so I haven't had a broad base of criminal experience. That would have to be a relearning experience for me.
Yeah, but as you said, I mean, our courts are, somewhat divided between criminal and civil and business areas of the law, and it's it's important to have judges with expertise in those areas. So if you're going a personal injury case, for instance, or a real estate case, which I know you're astutely familiar with, those kind of cases, you want a judge who has that kind of background. And if you're going on a criminal case, quite honestly, you want a judge that has a criminal background that can make appropriate rulings based on experience, right?
I agree 100%, yes.
You agree, you advocate that we keep those separate. I mean, we do have some departments that are mixed.
Some departments are mixed, but you'll recall back in the 70s, some judges wanted criminal departments because they got more free press when they were running for office.
Yeah. Because the murder cases make the front page.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Phil Aurbach, good luck in your race. He's running for District Court Department 4. Early voting is just about, I think it started by the time this is airing. So get out there and vote, and we'll be right back with Elliott Anderson talking about question 1, ballot question 1.
Thank you, Ed.
My daughter Dana fought a long battle with Crohn's disease before passing last year.
It's our goal to help the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation find a cure for this horrible disease.
Join Max and I in scoring our goal to find a cure. Well, welcome back. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to all the races we have this year, your ballot's going to contain questions. Now, I think they're numbered 1 through 6, but I believe there's only 5 questions. And with me, Elliott Anderson, who can speak to question 1, which is one of the more important questions, I guess. Now, question 1 has to do, I'm going to attempt to paraphrase this. Right now we have, the university has regents that essentially, well, I guess the argument is that they're not governed by any branch of government, and they're kind of running the university independently. Some people think that's good. Some people don't think it's very good. And with me is Elliott Anderson, who's going to talk about what question 1 will do and why he thinks you should vote for it. Well, welcome, Elliott.
Thank you, Ed. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So, what is? Look, these things are complicated, and you get these documents out of the mail, and they're still hard to understand. Give me the summary of what question 1 is about, and give me
Sure.
the layman path to voting correctly.
Well, question 1, we're urging a yes vote on question 1. Question 1 is called the Nevada Higher Education Reform, Accountability, and Oversight Amendment. And the ballot title fits really well because right now, under Nevada law, the Board of Regents has no outside accountability, no oversight, and no transparency. They kind of sit in this island by themselves where if the legislature tries to follow the $1.2 billion they get every 2 years, you kind of get these arguments. They sue, they threaten to sue and say, well, you don't have the power to, you have the power to give us all this money, but we're going to do what we want, and we haven't seen effective oversight in, the 150 years that we've had with the Board of Regents. It just hasn't been appropriate. So the legislature nearly unanimously passed this measure twice. And so this is the final step in getting it into the books.
So the oversight would be the legislature?
That's correct. Just like every other state agency, right? The executive branch enforces the law, the legislature writes the law, and they keep each other honest. They go back and forth. They say, this is in America, we believe we're all imperfect and everybody needs checks and balances and accountability and oversight. And so that's what question 1 does, a yes vote. Make sure that American principles of government are involved in higher education, and it's right now unchecked and unaccountable $1.2 billion budget.
Have there been problems with this in the past? As you said, it's been going on for 150 years. Why now?
Well, it just was a final confluence of events. And since the 1940s, 1981, there's been major lawsuits by the Board of Regents, and they've argued that they had a constitutional right to discriminate against seniors with age discrimination. They actually argued that in a court case. It's Board of Regents versus Oakley, since you're a lawyer, if you're interested. And they argued that they have virtual autonomy and immunity from the law and checks and balances. And so this has led to this attitude problem where they feel as though because they're, in the Constitution, they can do whatever they want. And whenever the legislature tries to get a hold of that budget and to make sure those dollars go into the classroom and they're not wasted or mismanaged, whenever that happens, we get threats and we hear that, well, we're not a part of the executive branch, so we don't have to undergo audits from the executive branch. So people call them the fourth branch of government because of this attitude. And that's led to misleading legislators about where all the money's going and all sorts of problems that I could go into at great length, but it just restores that accountability.
So would the regents still be elected the way they are now?
That's correct. Question 1 just restores accountability, transparency, and oversight. And because of NRS 396040, other Nevada law out there, they remain elected. So if voters vote yes on question 1, they are not voting to make them appointed. There's some confusion here because the language is confusing, and the Board of Regents are purposely misleading people that question 1 will take away their right to vote. It will not directly take away their right to vote whatsoever. And so voters should know question 1 is about accountability, oversight, and transparency.
And what is what do those involved in education feel about this question? The teachers, the college professors, and I even know, like the governor. We have a new head of what is it? We have a new governor appointed somebody.
Yeah, he appointed a new regent.
A new regent, and yeah. Well, but we also have, like the presidents of the universities and Reno and Las Vegas and at the community colleges. What does the rank and file think about this?
Well, we're proud to have faculty and students on our advisory board who are in the system of higher education. We also have 2 former community college presidents who are tired of the community colleges not getting a fair shake. Right now we spend all that money, $1.2 billion, and we're 16th ranked in the country for pure people higher ed spending, but we are 46 in college degree attainment. And so because of that, these community college presidents, where all that educating the workforce is really done, getting those degrees done. We have multiple former community colleges presidents who are supporting yes on 1 to ensure that those tax dollars get to the classroom. And the Board of Regents hasn't been good there. We also have the Clark County Education Association supporting question 1 to ensure that those dollars get to the classroom as well.
And I know you're not in the legislature anymore, but the prospect of continuing to get those kind of tax revenues for education, or does it look like we're going to have a problem collecting the tax revenues?
Well, I think question 1 will actually help restore the trust of the legislature. Right now, the legislature doesn't trust the Board of Regents to spend that money effectively. And so my hope is that when the legislature can finally keep the Board of Regents accountable, transparent, and provide that independent oversight, that we start to see the legislature giving even more. And they've already done a pretty good job just based upon the statistics. But, who knows what will happen with the economy. But, in bad economic times, all the more reason why we need to ensure that our tax dollars, that $1.2 billion, are wisely spent. And yes on 1, question 1 will help that.
You talk about the spending of the money and the accountability. I mean, give me some examples of where the regions spend the majority of the money and how the accountability will help.
Well, there's a lot of administrative bloat. Like in state government, it's well known that the best jobs are at the system of higher education working for the Board of Regents. And state employees seek to get to the system of higher education because they pay more, because they don't have any outside accountability for those funds. And so the legislature can't step in and say, wait, we don't like that, because if they do, the Board of Regents will sue to prevent that transparency and oversight and those accountabilities for those funds. So
creating the salaries is an area, for instance, that right now there's no accountability, that somebody at least will be looking over their shoulders.
Well, that's one potential look. That's one potential area. We've also seen them give expensive golden parachutes to administrators who were found to have really misled the legislature about the funding. And so there's a lot of ways and a lot of areas. And this is the first step, because we don't even get to have those conversations as people here in Nevada without a vote on question 1, because the regions have no outside accountability.
And if the question 1 passes, how would the transition occur? And when would it occur?
It's really not much of a transition. What it is it just changes the Constitution to give the legislature these powers. And so the day-to-day of higher ed still continues, just with now outside accountability, outside oversight, to ensure that those taxpayer dollars go to the classroom, that they're wisely spent and not wasted. So it's really not going to change. And there's a lot of fear that this could change higher education day to day. But it won't. It just gives the legislature power, like it has with every other state agency, to do basic American government checks and balances. And so I want people to understand this is very important, but it's not going to be hugely disruptive to higher education.
How are you getting the word out in this environment with COVID-19 and all this election hoopla?
Well, a lot of Zoom calls, of course, and so we're grateful for community advocates who are also putting our message out there. We've got Republicans, Democrats, we've got labor unions, we've got business, we've got rural Nevadans, southern Nevadans, northern Nevadans, faculty, students, and so there's a lot of word of mouth going on there. And this is the broadest coalition that I've ever seen in support of a ballot question of this magnitude. It really is something that I'm grateful for, because we do have a lot of support for accountability, oversight, and transparency that question 1 brings.
What is the argument against it? I know, when you get the mailer with the ballot questions, there's the argument for passage, argument against passage. Argument against it would be what? I mean, what are you hearing?
It changes all the time. Like they try to mislead people. They're making desperate excuses to say that this is going to make you lose your right to vote, but that's not true. NRS, like I said, the NRS, the statutory law, also provides for elections, and so a vote for question 1 doesn't do what they're saying. So I think they're just trying to convince people to be scared of the future. And I would submit to you, Ed, that we need to be scared of what's happening right now. We have wasteful spending, bad outcomes. We have 46 in college attainment, and so the status quo is not a good one. And I know that change is difficult sometimes, but people should feel very confident because this measure has been well vetted. It passed nearly unanimously in 2 sessions, Republicans, Democrats from all areas of the state. And I kid you not, the most broad coalition that I've ever seen, because it restores basic American principles, and they should take comfort with all the diligence that's been done.
And when this man tells you it's the broadest representation he's ever seen, he knows. He's a former assemblyman. He's been in that world of politics. So thank you so much, Elliott Anderson, advocating for your yes vote in question number 1. Thank you, Elliott, and we'll see you next week.
It's a pleasure.
My daughter Dana fought a long battle with Crohn's disease before passing last year. Max has spent a lifetime scoring goals.
It's our goal to help the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation find a cure for this horrible disease, so no one else's child has to suffer like Dana did.
Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis may be unfamiliar to you, but there are currently over 3 million Americans suffering from both. Join Max and I in scoring our goal to find a cure.